This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
Hello, good evening. This is the Easthampton City Council Ordinance Committee meeting for March 11th, 2025. And we have two meetings tonight. This first meeting, we're going to be talking very specifically about short-term rentals. At 6 o'clock, we will begin our meeting talking about the zoning recommendations that have been put together by the Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership. And so we'll begin that there. We do not have any meeting minutes to approve. And so we're good with that. The mayor's not here. So I think what we will start with is public speak. Just keep in mind that we have an hour and we're going to try to get through as much as we can. So if people have comments, things like that, just be mindful. If you also want to speak, if somebody already said what you said, brevity might be helpful. We are sympathetic, right? We are very empathetic. We recognize the urgency of this matter, which is why we scheduled this so quickly. And so we're going to do the best that we can to be able to get this process going. Okay. With that said, does anyone have anything that they would like to say? Yeah.
Actually, I'm not volunteering to speak first. I'm wondering, can we just have an idea of who's here from the town? I just don't know whoever he is.
City council your name.
Oh,
And the planning.
Just as an understanding of who's here as stakeholders.
Okay. I thought you wanted us to all introduce ourselves. No. I work with college students, and so that's usually.
She's gonna tell us.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Connie Denham, I'm the chair of the ordinance committee. I also sit on city council.
Salem Derby, president of the city council.
I'll start here.
Alice Emanuel, city planner, planning director.
Dylan Maxwell, the associate planner.
Great. And then we'll come over here.
Captain Dan Constantine, I'm the fire prevention officer, fire department.
I think that's every.
That's it from the city.
But yep, that's everyone from the city.
Thanks.
Great.
Just one thing, when you do speak, just state your name and address for the record so we can have it appropriately noted in the minutes.
Great. Anyone want to have anything they'd like to say?
I just want to briefly put out there for anybody that's here and that's watching is that there's a battery storage facility that's going in Westfield, and I think a lot of people don't know about it. It is being contested. It is actually going to sit right on our aquifer. And the challenge with that is that they tend to catch on fire. Many New York towns have forbidden them to be built at this point because of the damage that it does to the air quality and the water quality when they do catch on fire. So I just want people to know about it so that they can look into it for themselves.
And did you state your name?
Sorry, Kathy Wazinski, Overlook Drive.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Kathy. Appreciate that.
Is this where we should speak about our concerns about the ordinance?
Yep. Just state your name
John
and.
Losito, Losito. So on behalf of me and a couple of the other short-term renters, one of our thoughts is, the biggest one is that we're concerned about the 30-day time period. The letter states that we have 30 days to stop renting. So we want to make sure that there's some sort of stop on that, pause on that while we resolve these issues, because we've been paying taxes for anywhere from 1 to 8 years. And then I also wanted to just bring this up in case you guys didn't read into this about the bill that the governor just passed in regards to ADUs. Just wanted to read this and get everyone's take on this. This would be the Massachusetts Code. Okay, so it's chapter 150, section 7 and 8 the acts of 2024 ADUs. Paragraph 3 is subject to such additional, so this is in regards to ADUs, is subject to such additional restrictions as may be imposed by a municipality, including but not limited to additional size restrictions and restrictions or prohibitions on short-term rental as defined in Section 1 of Chapter 64G, provided, however, that no municipality shall unreasonably restrict the creation or rental of an accessory dwelling unit that is not a short-term rental. So it's very jargony, I know, but what it says is that the state allows short-term rentals of ADUs by right. And the cities can put an ordinance in their ordinance that they are not allowed. And our ordinance does not state that they are not allowed. So people who have ADUs should be allowed to have short-term renting in them.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
I don't want to take up much time. I just, for brevity, I just typed up notes to your guys' notes to just, so I wanted to discuss. Is that okay? Just for like each point, like I thought your draft was pretty good, pretty straightforward and pretty good. There was just a couple points that I just had questions about and wanted you guys to consider. So, I don't know if I should. I don't want to take up time. I don't know for the public, but if anyone wants a copy of it.
You go ahead and state what they are.
Yeah, okay, I'll state what they are. So in the purpose section, I think I've read through a lot of towns, and I just think it'd be great if we added the benefits of short-term rentals in our purpose section. For example, in Lennox, they say enable residents, in addition to all the protect the town, everything you guys have in there. Enable residents to earn additional income from their properties to better afford to live here, maintain their properties, and contribute to the community. That's Lennox's take on it. And then Nahat says, I don't know how to pronounce it. Balance the right of the homeowner to make reasonable use of their property while establishing rules that mitigate risk of negative impacts on neighbors and neighborhoods. So just including that, it's also, this ordinance isn't just about negative effects. It's also about adding value to our community.
Just ask which ordinance you're referring to, which draft, there's multiple.
Oh, sorry, the one that was attached to the city council.
It would have been the one that was, yeah.
Okay, the city council one. Yeah, okay. And then short-term registration, that section, in terms of putting limits on a number, that just feels kind of arbitrary. And I just want to be mindful about what problem you're trying to solve if you do limit it. So, and if you do feel that you want to limit them because of perhaps outside investors buying up our houses or things like that, to maybe delineate between owner occupied properties and properties owned by others. For example, if you rent rooms in your homes, I don't think you should limit that because they're not always available. You rent them when it's good for your family. Posting of notices, we've talked about that. I don't think big notices on the doors would feel kind of vulnerable that you can see from the street. But if there's something if the reason for that notice is for something for emergency personnel or something like that, maybe there's a smaller, more a place that we have to put it where fire and police would know where to see it. I don't want it from the street. Parking, I know Easthampton already is kind of behind not over mandating parking, but I think one space per unit would be enough. You don't want to be excessive per bedroom. That was it. And obviously that was it.
Great, thank you.
Other
I have a question. My name is Mindy Kofferman. I'm on West Street. Are we going to be going through these step by step? I'm not sure how we're proceeding tonight.
Yep, so what we'll do is I have a couple of emails that I'm also going to read into the record from the fire chief and also from the police chief. They couldn't be here. I have something from the building commissioner. He had some comments. He's unable to be here. He's under the weather. And then what we have is we have a couple of items. One, we're going to start with what Councillor Derby and Councillor Peak put together, because that's what is in the agenda. So we're going to talk about that, but also the building commissioner and our planning department also put together some language as well. And so we're going to talk about those things as well, so that we can see what are the kind of ways that we're going to we are not going to walk out of here today with a thing, right? A thing, but we're going to do the best we can to kind of
And
what are the
we'll
questions
be
that we
able
have?
to comment along the way or just now is the only
Yeah,
time?
so it's not a public hearing, and I think for our purposes, what's going to be most helpful is for us to be able to have this conversation. And then for you all, if there are things that do come up, it'd be great if you, what are the questions that you have? And then you email me them afterwards, because the next time we come back, we'll actually then try to answer those questions. I think just for sake of time, if we kind of get into these kind of back and forth conversations, it's just going to slow our process down. And there's a lot of us, right? And so we're going to do the best that we can to answer those questions, but they're going to come after, right? And also the question might be answered later down the way, right? And so it's just going to save us a little bit of time.
Laura Brooks, I'm on Greenwood Court, and my concerns are specifically geared towards like two families that are owner occupied. So I am, doing short-term rental on the other side, but to also bring forward the point, it's not always available. I mean, sometimes it's just there for my own guests, my own family, my own needs. So it's not like it's this constant churning out of short-term rental. So I don't know if that means that part of the guidelines might actually make some kind of reference to how much is being rented in the first place, because that does happen in other types of delineation, how much is being rented out. And then the 6 or more requiring a parking space per bedroom. I mean, that would hit me. I'm concerned about that.
Mm-hmm.
And the fire code. I'm sorry.
My name's John Santiago, 13 Oliver Street. Just specific items in this proposed ordinance that I wanted to comment on that haven't been mentioned. There's it's part 1, section 190-11, ineligible units. I know this was just copy and pasted from another town, so I just want to highlight there's item B, which is called family apartments or accessory affordable apartments. I think it would be important. Obviously, that town has a definition of what that means, but we don't in Easthampton. And I know there are a lot of us who want to maintain our right to use an ADU as a short-term rental. So I think it's just important to highlight what that means, family apartments or accessory affordable apartments. Because, there's no clear reason to allow it in a multifamily and not in an ADU, at least under the current situation. So the other thing is that there's a lot in here about the complaint review process, and I think a lot of at least in this draft, a lot of the way that those complaints are adjudicated falls on one person, the building commissioner. And I would like to suggest that it be considered to establish a more checks and balances system with perhaps an oversight board or a committee within the council. I don't know the whole structure of the town government, but the Easthampton Building Department is, for anybody that's tried to work with it, is notoriously overworked and has limited staff. There's also some question of, with regards to this particular topic and the opinions certain people might have about it, how much adjudication, how much power to adjudicate should be vested in one person. So I think there should be some consideration of all this language where everything funnels down to one person. I also think that the suggested fines for a first offense are too high, considering that that offense could be something extremely minor, and it might be a matter of, interpretation. So, and I also want to echo that I'm not sure who's going to give us the understanding, but all of us, our lives have been thrown into disarray, and it would be nice to understand when will we have some clarity about this quite aggressive letter that was sent to us and the timeline proposed in it.
2 points kind of following up, John. Mindy, West Street. in your proposed stuff with, as far as inspections, you're proposing by December 31st. Well, if you know anything about short-term rentals, the holiday seasons are the busiest. So I'm going to say maybe you want to adopt a corporate schedule like March 31st, because we don't probably want to block it's hard to get you into, we would love to get you into inspect, but it might mean blocking off our schedules to do that. And it might be better to do it in January, February, or March. It's a slower time period. The other thing, as far as following up John with, if there's a violation and we're asked to re-inspect, is that it happens in a timely manner, that's put into words, like how many days, because I know we've done, in my life work, we've done construction on buildings and we maybe didn't have a building commissioner and we couldn't get them to inspect, and that would also affect our livelihood if you give us 3 days and we want you back and you can't come.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that. Anything?
Laura Fisher. Excuse me. I'm here on behalf of a couple of folks who've received letters. I had one clarifying question about the proposed language. I'm sorry that I don't have the specific provision in front of me. But there was language around sort of affirming that anyone who applied for a short-term rental permit with the city is affirming or proffering that they do not have any active cease and desist letters or any sort of enforcement against them. So just curious about how that will, I understand that as a perspective matter, but if this room seems to be filled with a lot of people who do have active cease and desist letters. So just curious about how that would interlace with whatever the proposed solution is.
Okay. Oh, your hand, Kathy?
Kathy Wazinski, Overlook Drive. I'm curious, and this can be answered later, how many short-term rentals we currently have in the city, if anybody knows. And apparently somebody has an answer.
37 according to the Department of Revenue.
Okay. And I am aware that there is some research that shows that housing costs and rental costs go up with a high density of short-term rentals. And I think given that we are experiencing some concern over the cost of housing in the community, having a high density of short-term rentals may continue to increase the cost of rentals in general and the cost of housing in general. And I think that we should be mindful of that.
Any other comments? Okay, I'm just going to read a few things because they did request that. So this is from David Gardner. He's the building inspector. Dear committee members, as of a few days ago, I fully intended to attend this evening's meeting, but instead I developed a very nasty cold that I do not wish to share with you. Please read the following, my perspective at this evening's meeting, wherever it fits in, according to the definition of short-term rental, as provided by 10.11.2 of the initial draft. Accessory dwelling units may be used as short-term rentals. I believe accessory dwellings created under section 8.5 of the city's ordinance should not be used as short-term rentals. According to the ordinance, advisory dwelling units ADU shall conform to the provisions of this section 8.5. 8.51 purpose. The purpose of the accessory dwelling unit ordinance is to A, add inexpensive rental units to the housing stock to meet the needs of smaller households, young and old. B, make housing units available and attainable to low and moderate income households who might otherwise have difficulty finding housing within the city. C, address the housing needs of Easthampton residents. Short-term rentals are not inexpensive rental units that meet the needs of smaller households. They do not meet housing units available and attainable to low and moderate income households who might otherwise have difficulty finding housing within the city, and they do not address the housing needs of Easthampton residents. The fact is, allowing the use of ADUs permitted under 8.5 for small-term rental would be antithetical to the purpose of 8.5 and undermines the city's ongoing efforts to increase its stock of affordable rental units. As such, I believe the proposal to make an accessory dwelling unit unavailable to low to moderate income persons who need it so it can be used as a short-term rental should not be allowed. This is from Chris Norris, Chief Norris. He's the police chief.
Fire chief.
I'm sorry, boy, the fire chief.
You want me to read it? Or
Yeah, if you want to read it, that'd be great.
Give me a break. All right, good afternoon. I wanted to provide some perspective from the fire and EMS emergency response systems for any proposed short-term rental agreements for the city of Easthampton. Currently, there's a lack of national safety standards for peer-to-peer hospitality services like Airbnb, which leave room for ambiguity about safety requirements. To provide context to the statement, a study done by Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health 2018 found that nationally that only 40% of Airbnb rentals are equipped with fire extinguishers and first aid kits. Were reported in just over a third, 36% of venues. Based on this research and other limitations in the fire and life safety code specific to Massachusetts, I'm recommended some of the following for any short-term rental units in the city of Easthampton. Annual inspections conducted by the fire department with associated fees for service, at least one 5-pound multi-purpose extinguisher located near exit and on each level of habitation, fully stocked first aid kit, smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors that comply with 527 CMR 1.00, proper house numbering per city ordinance, signage that is laminated and near all means of egress outlining occupancy evacuation routes, actual address of occupancy in event of emergency, dial 911, number for non-emergencies, and a 24-hour contact number for actual owner of the property. Residential lockbox is encouraged to assist in gaining access. Any outdoor burning such as campfires or cooking fires, fire department notification and permission need to be obtained. Any multi-unit building, apartment building is only able to have one unit designated as a short-term rental unit. A landline phone must be provided in the unit, and automatic fire suppressor mounted above the stove, oven, kitchen range. The above list is preliminary requests and concerns. Captain Dan Constantine will be in attendance. I'll be in attendance tonight. And please let me know if you have any questions. The chief and I sat down and we kind of went through this because of the person renting the unit to be short term and not familiar with possibly the area or the unit. So we came up with some of these that are under some of the other provisions in the fire code for like boarding houses, etc., and hotels and stuff. So
Thank you for the words from the fire chief. All right, these comments are from Dennis Scribner. He's the interim chief of police. So I will read these right now. And again, this is just to provide context of what other department heads are talking about this, right? Because it's going to be a joint effort as we kind of talk about these things, right? So dear Councilor Denham, I hope this letter finds you well. As interim chief of police, I'm writing to express our concerns regarding the increasing number of short-term property rentals within our city. While we acknowledge the economic benefits that such rentals can bring to property owners and the local economy, it is important to highlight the potential risks that are associated with them. Over the past few years, our department has observed an increase in calls for service related to properties that are being rented on a short-term basis. These calls have included disturbances, noise complaints, and even instances of illegal activities occurring on such properties. Short-term rental properties can often attract individuals who are less familiar with the area, which may lead to safety concerns for both residents and visitors. Furthermore, the transient nature of these rentals can complicate efforts to maintain public order and address criminal behavior effectively. Specifically, there is a short-term rental property in close proximity to the Easthampton Public Safety Complex that has resulted in approximately 40 calls for service related to noise complaints and disturbances. In light of these challenges, we believe that it is imperative for the City Council to implement clear and enforceable regulations governing short-term property rentals. These regulations could include, but not be limited to, limiting the number of short-term rentals in certain residential areas to reduce potential negative impact on neighborhoods, and setting clear guidelines for owner responsibilities in addressing issues such as noise, safety concerns, and unlawful behavior. By adopting such regulations, we can balance the interests of property owners with the safety and well-being of our community. We feel it is important that the City Council take proactive steps to mitigate the potential negative effects of short-term property rentals while preserving the integrity of our neighborhoods. Appreciate your attention. Signed, Dennis Scribner, interim chief of police. Okay, so I just wanted to read those into the record so that you all have that for your context as well, right? Now we're going to, as I said, there are a few different examples that the planning board and the building inspector worked on, but we're actually going to start with what Councillor Derby and Councillor Peak submitted to for the packet. That's where we started with this. So I'm gonna turn this over to you to provide any context that you would like to provide for that.
Sure. I mean, I think the context is pretty simple. It's city council rules require a sample ordinance to be submitted with any request for new business. So knowing that this was a pressing issue, I put together I took a few different towns, amalgamated them, and tried to make them make some sense, but I wasn't able to fully vet it, which is why I put a very clear disclaimer on it, saying that this is just a starting point. Which I think is important because at that time we didn't have a starting point, and this wasn't under council business, so we couldn't even talk about it. So that really was the purpose of this. And, this was 3 different cities in Massachusetts, kind of just pulling them together and saying, okay, this part looks kind of good. This part looks kind of good. But I'm fully open to feedback, fully open to the planning department's suggestions. And I'm not married to this whatsoever. If we find that this is not something that works, that's fine with me. I just wanted to make sure we got it in front of us.
Yep.
And that was the intent of this. So, but I did, spend some time reading all of them and trying to put something that made sense to me. The things that were kind of up in the air were the number of units, how much it would cost to get a permit, the inspection pieces, the enforcement pieces. Those were all kind of just, I'll leave those in. We can work those out as we go through the process. So, I don't know how much detail we want to get into this, but I think really this was intended to be a starting point.
Yep, great. Thank you for that, Councillor Derby. And I forgot to mention Councillor Smith, who also sits on this committee. Personal reasons was unable to be here today, but she will be involved in further conversation. So I apologize, I forgot to mention that. I do want to turn to the planning director. You also shared with us some additional example of what you had written you all worked on for the city. So I'd actually like to offer you the time to kind of share that and provide kind of an overview of that. And what will likely happen in conversation with the building inspector, he had said, "Ooh, there were things in this that we hadn't thought of," right? And there might be things in here we're like, "Ooh, that's actually kind of right, probably where we need to be thinking." And so today we're gonna kind of talk. Many of you have probably read this one, so it would be great if you could provide a little bit more detail to this one. And what we're likely going to do is we'll in the interim look at these things, come back and see if there's some things that we can do to kind of pull some of these pieces together in the larger, right? So I'm going to turn it over to you, Allison, to walk us through this.
Sure, yeah, of course. So, we took a similar approach, not reinventing the wheel, looking at what other communities have done while also just sort of brainstorming concerns that have come up, especially the building commissioner is often the person that gets called when there are complaints or questions. So he had some insight on those types of issues. So what we have proposed is actually 2 separate ordinances. One is a zoning ordinance, and the other is a general city ordinance. And the zoning ordinance is brief. It does provide for a special permit process, which I think is, completely up for discussion. But I do believe it needs to be in the zoning ordinance in light of the accessory dwelling unit conversations that have been had, and in light of the state's sort of inclusion of short-term rentals in a number of their regulations. So clarifying it from a land use perspective in the zoning ordinance, I think is important. So the zoning ordinance is pretty brief, as I think I said, whereas the general ordinance is more detailed and goes into more about the registration requirements, operational requirements. It does set some standards and limitations. Notably, it does include a restriction that the property can't be owned by a corporation. It can be a single person, a marital unit, a group of people, an LLC, or a trust. And the objective of that is to deter like large commercial property interests from taking over too much of the housing in Easthampton. I will read the purpose and intent. I know that came up with the other sample ordinance. So it states, pursuant to the authority of general law, chapter 64G, the city establishes these regulations to balance private, neighborhood, and civic interests. These regulations are intended to enable residents to earn income from their properties, to better afford to live in Easthampton, maintain their properties, and contribute to the community. 2, to minimize public safety and health risks. 3, support local tourism in a sustainable manner. And 4, deter commercial interests from buying housing to use primarily as short-term rental businesses. There was some, I don't want to say disagreement, but differing opinions about, the number, if there's a cap, if accessory dwelling units should in fact be allowed to be used for short-term rentals. One idea that came up was whether there should be a limit on the number of non-owner occupied short-term rental properties. I think one thing that was universally agreed upon was that any property should only have one short-term rental on it. And that there should be additional limitations on properties that are not owner occupied, such as limiting, the way it's written right now is up to 4 stays per month. So each rental transaction or turnover of guests shall constitute a separate stay. So again, that's for properties that are not owner occupied. Properties that were owner occupied would not have that limitation. The sort of logic there being that there's somebody on site to respond to concerns and to sort of self-police the property. There's a restriction that a dwelling unit that's designated as affordable or otherwise income restricted, which are subject to affordability covenants or otherwise subject to housing or rental assistance under local, state, or federal programs or law, are prohibited from being used for short-term rentals. I think that's like already a law, but we're sort of reiterating it there to make it abundantly clear. Of course, there's inspection requirements along with the registration. It does, at the building commissioner's request, include him as the base for registrations to be filed. And I think that's in part because they are already used to facilitating inspections among the multiple departments. And a certificate of occupancy, which is issued by the building commissioner, will be required for all of these units. So in his mind, it was sort of a logical place to house the registration process. There's some mention of compliance and responsibilities of owners to maintain records and make them available to the city if needed. And the city having the right to monitor compliance with, publicly available information, possibly third-party services, and other lawful means. Penalties, as is standard, there are civil penalties in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 480, Section 21D. First offense is 100, second is 200, and third is 300, and each subsequent offense would be 300. Some of the other items that have already been touched on that are included in here are contact information for the operator, posting you know, in a conspicuous place, the owner's certificate of registration, the street address. We don't have, but I would be happy to include. Oh no, I'm sorry, it is in here. So they shall contain a functional smoke CO heat detector alarm system that meets or exceeds current building code and National Fire Protection Association standards installed throughout the entire building, and a properly maintained and charged multi-purpose fire extinguisher. Note that additional requirements may apply under the state building code and or fire code. We do include the measure that a short-term rental is not allowed on any property with outstanding violations of building, fire, health codes, and or city ordinances. I will just say, presumably, if an ordinance is passed permitting short-term rentals, the current cease and desist orders will be looped. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that conflict necessarily. The other included is events that include amplified music or tents, which would customarily require a license or permit, are prohibited from occurring at the same time as any short-term rental period, hoping to deter parties and things from being held at the properties, and prohibiting signage. So, you can't advertise it outside the property or anywhere that the public would be exposed to that advertisement other than like the internet. So there's more in there. Reading it word for word while my voice is hoarse, just maybe not the best for me right now, but I think there are a lot of similarities between what the council president brought forward and what is included here. The primary difference, I think, being the separation of the zoning and general ordinance component of it. I do think it's an important conversation to have about the zoning side, whether or not we do want to have the special permit requirement, and what standards and criteria would go along with that. But it is included right now for conversational purposes.
Thank you for that overview. I think there's this is a lot, and this is much more condensed, right? I think there's a lot of overlap in terms of purpose, definitions, registration requirements, standards, limitations, et cetera, et cetera. Councilor Derby, do you have any questions or anything like that for planning director?
Yeah, I think so. The special permit piece. So our neighbors that I think South Hadley has had an ordinance. How do they approach the registration piece? Did they do special? Do you know? I'm sorry to put you on the
should know.
spot.
The commissioner has brought it up several times. I looked at so many, I can't recall. Some communities I have seen, they have a separate zoning ordinance. I think it's less common for there to be a special permit requirement. Not that it doesn't exist. I think it's just less common.
Because when I first heard that, it just like struck me at first as being a little restrictive.
Yeah, so the conversation that initiated out of the zoning board of appeals hearing that was relative to short-term rentals. There was talk of like, well, if there's a special permit process, we're happy to go through it. So I just sort of included it because it was part of the initial conversation. But yeah, I think it's worth looking at.
Right. And some communities just do it by right, where they just have to apply for they just have to register it, and then they don't have to go to the planning board at all, necessarily.
Correct. Yeah. So that the general ordinance it is that kind of by right component of it.
I had another one, but I can't remember it now.
I actually had a question about limitations or number, like capping. What is just in reviewing our conversation, because you said that you all were kind of had differing opinions and things like that. What was the general consensus? Well, there isn't a general because you're all over the place, but what was the thinking around some of the various perspectives about capping numbers?
Yeah, I mean, I think the cap, it just in general is intended to preserve housing for permanent residents. people that live and work in the community, and to also limit the sort of potential for negative impact on our emergency services. But the number itself, I think, there wasn't really any strong sense one way or the other. It's at 50 right now, just as a placeholder, and calculating that out, that's less than half of, or no, it's just slightly over half of 1% of the total housing units in the city. The building commissioner estimated the number of short-term rentals in the city to be somewhere around there. They're not all registered with the Department of Revenue, so that number is lower. Based on his research, it is higher than that 36 or whatever it is that's registered. So, we wanted to, ideally provide an opportunity for people that are already operating these to do so within the confines of these regulations, and not, have a like mass herd of everybody trying to be, the one to get it. So I think that number probably needs to be looked at more too, and with the building commissioner who has a better sense of like the total number of units.
And when you say looked at more closely in terms of possibly increasing that number or decreasing them?
I think I would really want
Not to
feedback.
put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, I would really want feedback from like the wider community on that. I obviously we hear a lot from the operators because this is like a very important thing to them and is a current like stressor on them. But I haven't heard much from like non-operators about their thoughts on this, which is the majority. So I'm hoping this process will sort of facilitate that.
I do want to, one thing I think I would like to acknowledge, right? I think when the city council several years ago kind of started the process of putting this ordinance together for ADUs and things like that, I don't think that I wasn't a part of it, so, but I'll put myself in city council because I think this often happens where we believe that we're doing one thing and something else emerges out of it that we were not necessarily anticipating, right? And so I think that's some of what the response from the building inspector, and we can go back and forth about tone and all of those various things, and that's very real. And at the same time, there are guidelines for which the city had in place, which were not geared towards what we're now experiencing, right? And so, on the one hand, it's really great that residents thought, oh, hey, here's an opportunity to help me be able to stay in my home, right? Totally real, completely understandable, et cetera. And then the city said, oh, wait a minute, we actually don't have any guidelines for that, right? And so I think it's important that people were able to see this as an opportunity, and now the city is trying to catch up, right? And I think we want to make sure that we do it right so that we don't actually create some other kind of situation where we're like, oh, we didn't think about that, or we didn't think about that, right? So just want to acknowledge that, I think all of you were rightfully caught off guard, and I want to be empathetic to that and acknowledge that, because I think that's a very real kind of response, particularly when you're relying on these funds for your livelihood, and we're trying to do right by catching up to that situation. So I just want to acknowledge that. Other thoughts about questions?
Well, I was thinking about ADUs as well, and I hear what the building commissioner is saying. I don't necessarily agree. So I think that's a piece that we're going to have to dig into a little bit, because I think that there might be times when your ADU is unoccupied and you can use it as a short-term rental, and it could serve a valid purpose. I think that if all ADUs did that would be an issue. Because part of the ADU reason why we passed it was to provide opportunities for people to have lower rent, or have multi-generational or what But I also don't think it's necessarily our place to pull that out from other people if they invested in that at this point. So I think that I would like that piece to be a focus of our discussion at some point.
Yeah, my perspective is it kind of lends itself to the owner occupied model.
Mhm.
too.
Yes.
It's favorable.
And I guess just one other thing, and I don't know how this necessarily would work, but we have mills, and those mills have residential spaces, and some of those residential spaces I don't think are just for rent. Like I feel like those are, like in Eastworks, maybe those are condoed out, so people own those. And no,
Yeah, I think
are they just rentals? Okay.
just rentals.
Because when we did zero lot lines, I thought that some of those were one of the reasons why we did zero lot lines was to allow for some of those to get condoed out. But I guess it didn't happen. But if they did, I mean, that might be something to think about, because then we do have those spaces in town, and those would be potentially more than one in one building.
Yeah, I thought of that as well, especially with the event venue that's in one of the buildings as well, weddings and things. It would be convenient to have places, maybe more than one in a building of that size. So yeah, I think, and that's kind of, I think, where the zoning piece of it comes in too, because the mills have their own special zone. So you would be able to tie it to that specifically.
So I wanted to put that on the radar.
Yep. I do remember, and I'm glad you brought that up. I feel like we were thinking about our wedding, being in Eastworks. At one point it seemed like one of those floors was going to be used for like a hotel space, but I don't know that ever panned out because that was one of the conversations that we had was, oh, here's this. So that's
and hotels would still be allowed. It's just obviously it's a different model.
Yeah. I also question that I have that some of this is just us asking questions right now initially, but in here it talked about in one of these limiting short-term rentals in neighborhoods. Do you know any instances where short-term rentals were only in one particular area of town, or a limited number in this many this particular residential area, or anything like that?
Yeah, so at present, I don't know if it was in yours, but I know David, the building commissioner, did discuss that. And I'm not sure if that was something he had sort of gathered from South Hadley or not. I don't think I came across it in the other ones. I think the only argument would be to prevent that sort of like clustering potential, but it wasn't something that was discussed that way.
Okay.
I also feel like as we, after this meeting, we go into our, looking at affordable housing zoning. I think a big piece of that is, if certain parts of town might, and we don't want certain parts of town to be, clustered. So I feel like that's a piece that we also need to look at to make sure we're not, creating some sort of
The destabilizing effect on the neighborhood is the concern.
Yep. Great. Other questions from?
Ask a question to Allison.
Yeah, just 1 second. We don't have any more questions. Because we do have some more time to this, I want to open it up, but I just want to make sure if we have any other thoughts or comments.
I'd like to hear thoughts.
I think you had your hand up a while ago, so I want to be
I
respectful.
was just going to ask if there was space to add a experience for context.
Sure.
Can I speak? As far as the zoning goes, section 8.5 accessory dwelling units, I'm not sure who is the arbiter, but I think there's a strong argument to be made that the way that the purpose reads, it's not that it has to be A, B, C, D, E, and F, because obviously section C of 8.51 says the purpose of the accessory dwelling unit ordinance is to address the housing needs of Easthampton residents. Nobody would dispute that accessory dwelling units are allowed to be built so that my mom can come and live with me. So we cannot have C and A, meaning that A, B, and C do not all have to be true to comply with the ordinance. Therefore, it's within my right under the zoning to build an accessory dwelling unit that is not with the purpose of being an inexpensive rental unit. So just to establish as a baseline, my housing needs are that I have another kid on the way. My house is not big enough. My grandparents live hours and hours away, some of them in another country. I built an ADU so that they can come and live with us from time to time, not permanently, but so that they can stay with us and help us so we don't have to move out of Easthampton. And I can't afford to move right now. So I built an ADU for that reason, but my parents aren't here all the time. So as the councilman alluded to, basically I'm helping to finance that building by renting it. And probably in a given month, I have it rented out like half the nights. And so for me, like, I did exactly what the zoning said. I made like a very large investment, totally above board, consulted with the planning department and the building department, had the fire department in there to address my housing needs. Part of my housing needs is that I can't afford the place where I'm living without this extra income, but I can't use it for my parents if I have somebody living in there 24/7. So that's a housing need for me. And what's the difference between renting, my second floor in a 2-family house and renting a single family dwelling and renting an ADU? Like if we agree that short-term rentals have value, they should have value everywhere. But I just want to say, like, my personal experience is that, I was doing exactly what I was entitled to do. And I think it's important to have like a legal reading of what does 8.51 say. And it clearly does not say that you have to have inexpensive rental units. Furthermore, we cannot define inexpensive rental units unless there's a metric in the zoning. And there's no metric in the zoning that says inexpensive means 40% of the median income, or that it means, there has to be a number that's not in the zoning. So inexpensive is subjective. And, I would have no problem making that argument to any court. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, when Allison was talking about, non-owner occupied properties, you mentioned in a month period of time that somebody might be allowed to have 4 different guests. And I'm wondering what that's based on. And that seems fairly limited based on 30 days in the month. When most short-term could be 1 night to 30 nights, right?
Yeah, it was something that appeared in another ordinance, and the idea there being to limit the number of kind of random people coming and going from a property that doesn't have a permanent resident within it. So yeah, that was the logic.
I suggest, instead of, I would suggest that if someone owned a house that was renting it, but actually was a resident of Easthampton, as opposed to living in New York City renting it, that maybe that number could change.
Mm-hmm. So as an example of that might be you're living in Easthampton and you have a property that you're renting out. And so because you're easily accessible to that particular space as opposed to,
for example, yes, if I have a house that's next door to where I live, right next door,
yep,
I'm there to take care of it.
Yep. I just want to make sure. Yep. We're clear.
Thank you.
Yep. I also wanted to speak to the 4 nights. And just some of this, like, not from you, but just in general in our society now, this like fear of outsiders and these random people in our homes. And that makes me sad overall, because I feel like our country just looks at other people like that now. And the truth is, the people that are staying, like in our situation, they stay in my mom's home with her. They're lovely people. Their family members live here. We've met some really cool people. Like someone stayed there before because she bought a house in Easthampton and she couldn't move in right away. And she's a novelist. We've met and made some connections that we've actually maintained after they leave. So to base laws on random people coming to town, I feel is a very fear-based, and I'd really hope that as a city of Easthampton, we don't have that tone. So that's just, and I also want to speak to the ADUs. It's like, I think they're just such flexible spaces. I'm starting to build on mine. Mine is to live in for my family right now because we've outgrown our house. But in my head, I thought this will be flexible in the future should I need to rent it out because my kids have moved out and it's too expensive for me to live here. So it's like, it's only looking at affordability one way for the person living in the ADU. What about for the homeowner who needs that income to live in Easthampton? So that's also a key component of affordability. I think owner occupied is a key delineation when you're making this, but even like, I know that one of our, I don't know if you live out of the state, but at the zoning meeting I went, as long as you have someone here that's responsible for the home and whether or not the actual owner is here. I think. But I also appreciate, I'll say what I appreciate, the no corporations. I do appreciate that. I'm on the Fair Housing Partnership. I want fair and affordable housing here. I don't want corporations buying up Easthampton, so totally support that.
Yeah, just to piggyback off what you said, Lindsay, with the, my concern is with the limitation on the number of nights. I'm unclear on who would enforce that and how that would be enforced. Like, is it really going to be the practice of the city to be checking to see, to be looking at the filings each year to see, oh, did this person rent 20 nights or 30? Like, I'm just unclear who would be doing that.
I just want to clarify, the way it's written right now is not nights. It's
days.
It's still,
I just want to
Yeah,
clarify.
I guess my concern is who would enforce that, and is there capacity for enforcement of that level of detail? And is that something we?
I'm cognizant of time, so one more comment.
Yeah, so I just wanted to reiterate a couple of important
And can you say
things.
your name again? Sorry.
John Lucido. So first of all, I just want to say that we didn't mention this yet, but when we registered and started paying taxes on these, this should have been caught, right? So we have been paying taxes for many years.
It's true.
And then the other point is, I just went back and looked at the date of my letter, and I think it's very important that somehow we all need to get in writing that we can keep running our Airbnbs, because I'm actually not supposed to rent this weekend, according to that letter. And I was told to hold off to see what's going on. And so if we sit here and verbally say, it's okay, just keep renting, that's one thing, but I don't know if that's going to hold up. And I don't really want anybody showing up at my house and saying, why do you have someone renting? It's been 31 days.
I'm not in a position of giving you that answer right now. I will ask and talk to the mayor and the building commissioner. I know that the zoning board of appeals, to my understanding, didn't make a decision at this particular point. So I don't know what
So
that
I was
means.
told to file an appeal with the zoning board of appeals,
Mhm.
but that's a super gray area, whether that holds up against the building inspector.
Yeah, the best I
Doesn't
can.
really, there's nowhere that says that that puts a hold on his cease and desist.
Sure. So that's why I have to talk to them just to figure out where they are with that. Like, I'm just not, if I could make decisions like that in all of these meetings, I would do that. Because I want to be accommodating. I recognize this is a particularly challenging time, and I know, as you know, that many of you are relying on the income, right? And like I said, I'm very empathetic to that. I recognize that as a need, and all I can do is say, I'll ask at this point.
We're also cheerleaders of Easthampton. Keep our
Absolutely.
people here to eat in these restaurants and go to Luthier's Co-op for music and like do all the things. We're like, Northampton, this is way cooler, because it is.
Just to be clear, I have specifically asked the mayor to ask for what you just asked for.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be important for all of us to keep asking for that.
Yeah.
I know that Councilor Peak made a statement at City Council on Wednesday, but unfortunately, we don't have a lot of unilateral power.
Right.
And we're not the building commissioner's supervisor.
Yes.
He's not one of our appointments. So we just have to keep the pressure up, and I would say it's talking to the mayor.
Okay.
For sure.
Well, and we do appreciate you guys jumping right on this. So I don't want
For
to,
sure.
yeah. Okay. So thanks.
And just for the record, we do love Northampton too, for any North. Just so we're clear about that.
Come on.
We do love Easthampton, right? So we love Easthampton, but we love our neighbors too. Appreciate all of you. We've asked a number of questions, which as committee members and as people who are working on this within the planning department, I'm hoping that we'll be able to find some revisions and common ground, particularly as we come to the next one, to actually kind of get into this and actually think about some of the language. I think tonight was, again, just the first step, right?
Yeah.
So we want to acknowledge that.
When would the next one be?
We are going to need to schedule
Schedule a
that,
meeting,
and
yeah.
we can try to schedule that maybe right now.
Yeah, we can try.
We do have another member who is not here, but we will do our best to schedule that with her.
I mean, I can do the 25th. I don't know.
25th. I think I can do the 25th, so we will reach out to Counselor Smith.
I won't be able to be here for that. I'm sorry, I have another meeting.
You have another meeting at that time?
I mean, I think that's fine as long as like we can get some feedback and,
Sure, yeah,
Okay.
of course.
you know, I think one of the things that we can do independently, since we're not in a meeting, we can't really deliberate outside
we
of a
can't
public
deliberate.
meeting, but we can work on these things on our own. And then we can bring drafts that we've worked on to that meeting to kind of, and we can also send them out to the planner for like, you know, thoughts and ideas for that meeting.
So question, can you do 5 o'clock?
Sure.
Okay, so if we were to do 5 o'clock, just for sake of people's kind of, can you do 2 hours?
Sure.
All right, so I think what we'll try to do for this is a 5 to 7 on the 25th,
Of March.
March
Yep. So,
of December.
2 weeks from tonight.
Yes.
2 weeks from tonight.
Never know.
I need time to get through this. So yeah, so we'll do, March 5th. This is, again, tentative, because we will communicate. We do want Counselor Smith to be there, but we'll try to make that a long working meeting, to address some of this. All right? Anything? All right, thank you so much. I appreciate all of you for coming. We'll try to get a bigger room too next time.
I'm gonna be really fast. Never done it.
Sure.
Would that be okay?
Of course,
Yeah,
that was actually a question.
Awesome.
Yeah.
While we're making this transition, Counselor Derby, we have 2
Yes.
more quick items that would be
Sure.
really helpful to
Yeah, let's get
address while
those.
you are here. We have the Easthampton shrubbery ordinance. I shared this with the director of DPW
I'm doing it.
and our engineer. They found this to be very workable. The one small change that you'll see on the first page here, if we could just quiet down and quiet down. If
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
gonna
if you guys
continue
wouldn't
to
mind just
talk, if
going
you're
out
gonna
with
keep
the-
talking, can you move it out? You'll see on the first page there, that middle paragraph, I struck out for a distance of 25 feet, blah, blah,
Yes,
blah.
yes.
And the reason for that is in that conversation,
Oh, yeah.
the city engineer, she showed some examples of non-conforming properties, some of which 25 feet brought you to the sidewalk, or 25 feet brought you to the corner of the
That's
house.
what I was gonna say.
And so what this does, it strikes that, and so it's an intersection of any public or private way. The public works, or the director of public works shall determine the area of unobstructed view. All right,
Okay, that
so
works for me.
basically it just leaves it to him to be able to say, yeah, that's not visible.
That was my biggest gripe.
Yes, right. So I think what we need now is a motion, I think, to send this back to the attorney, I think, to make sure that he's gonna be okay with that language change.
We don't need a motion. I can just send it to him.
Okay, you'll just send it to him,
Yep.
and then once that gets approved, then we'll need a motion to send this then back
full
to
council.
the full council. So I'll take a motion to send it back to full council.
Yep, so moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, great.
And if you send me the digital copy of this,
I'll
I'll
send you the digital
forward it to.
Great. The other item that we need to look at real quick is the motion for special municipal employee status. The last time that this was approved, there were a number of committees, boards, commissions that were not included in that,
Okay.
and or they changed their name. So this is just the full
easy.
list. And again, for special municipal employees, it really relates to conflict of interest. It's a status that is assigned by city council. These are for not paid positions. So
And we're ready. I mean, I feel like if the list is updated and I feel like we could move that.
yes, right.
So I would make a motion to move that to the full council.
Okay, great. And I second that. All in favor? All right, great. So we will send that to the council. So that's good for that. All right. Great. Thank you for that. Thank you for listening in on that very quick discussion. We are going to start the next part of our meeting. And you all are welcome to sit at the table. Committee.
Well, actually, the same chair.
So for this section of the meeting, we're going to talk about the Easthampton zoning ordinance recommendations that were put together by the Easthampton Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership. Again, these are recommendations. And this, I know that the chair will be able to give a little bit more context of this, but it is something that was worked on for over a year. As I mentioned in a previous meeting, we are just starting the conversation within the context of city council, which is why it has come to the ordinance committee. This is now not before city council, so city council is not making any recommendations or moving forward with any of these things. They will in fact wait for the recommendations from this committee on whether or not, if at all, we'll move forward with any of these items. And we also have our friends from our staff from the planning department to provide any information or insight that they might be able to provide to us regarding that. I do have some comments that I want to make towards this, but I also want to give any time for public speak. So if residents have comments that they want to make during this particular comment or this particular part of the meeting, you can do so. It will likely be the only time that you participate in the public speak of the meeting. In part because, again, this is not a public hearing. If we have time like we did the last one, then we can open it up for questions. But it's not intended to be a back and forth. It's really kind of us understanding the perspective of the Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership and kind of what they were thinking in terms of this. So with that, is there anyone who would like to speak regarding the zoning ordinance? And if so, please state your name and address. I see Sean, you have your hand up. So if you would like to give us your name and address.
Yep. Hello. My name is Sean Abbott. I live on 21 Summer Street. I was incredibly excited to see this proposal come in. This is very, very, very needed. It's very, very, very important, and this proposal is excellent across the board. So I was really excited to see this. I have a few things that I know are going to be part of this process as we move forward. There are going to be people that are trying to push back on this, but the Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership did an amazing job with their research. They did an amazing job with citing their research in this proposal. And I can nearly guarantee you that the folks that are going to be pushing back against this are going to be doing it basically based on vibes. They are not going to be able to provide, recent evidence. They are not going to be able to provide studies. And I would really like to encourage the councilors in the committee to insist that folks that dislike these recommendations provide evidence for what they are claiming. For instance, lost my train of thought there, but I do think that there will be a number of people who say we need to slow down and study this more. I know that Easthampton is an exceptional city, but it is not exception to the rule that has been demonstrated across many studies, across many cities, all across the United States, that these sorts of zoning reforms work. And so I think that we should, make sure that we have equal evidentiary requirements for both, for all sides of this argument. My only complaints about this proposal is that I don't think that in many ways it goes far enough. There's a few things that I'd like to call out that I think we should go further on. I think we should completely eliminate parking minimums. And I want to make a point that that will not mean that developers, that new construction, that homeowners that are building houses just stop building parking. That just means that people will be able to build the right amount of parking for the facilities that they're building, and not be restricted to providing extra space for cars instead of people, space that does not bring good and tax space, does not do anything for us other than provide storage space for, expensive private assets. I'd love to see us consider a even one more zoning area, which we might consider like a walking zone as opposed to just an urban zone. And in that area, I'd like to see us, if we did not eliminate parking minimums anywhere else, I'd like to see us eliminate parking minimums in that particular zone. I would love to see in that zone setbacks reduced even further. I think they're still a little bit large in the urban zone and potentially in the suburban zone. And I'd like to see the mixed use opened up even wider for anything that's sort of not, late night or, sort of detrimental to the lives of the people around it. So no industry, maybe, some of the farming and stuff, that's bad, but like pretty much any office folks want to have, anything that has, sort of your standard 9 to 5 hours, I don't see any reason that we can't have that be as mixed use as we want. And as a final note, I do think that, that people will raise concerns about safety and other things in terms of things like setback and those, but I think the proper place for that is in building code, not in zoning. So I was, again, extremely excited to see this proposal. I'm so thrilled. Thank you so much to the Affordable and Fair Housing group for developing this. And I really do hope that we can move forward at a reasonable pace and see this enacted. Thank you.
Great. Anyone else who would like to speak? Kathy? Again, name and I know you know the routine.
I do. Kathy Wazinski, Overlook Drive. I would like us to slow down on changing our zoning regulations currently. I do not believe that our infrastructure can handle the increased density, particularly given the density increases that are happening with the building, the larger developments occurring in town. We have a tie-in bond report from 2018 that talks about crumbling sewer infrastructure that has not been addressed yet. Or has been addressed minimally. And we also have issues where the zoning that's proposed actually negatively impacts our aquifer, which is our only source of drinking water. And that aquifer needs to be protected. Once it is depleted or once it's damaged, because of increased density and overuse, then it's gone and we have no drinking water. So that's a huge problem. Those are the first two concerns that I have. Secondly, I do believe that some of the language changes are not appropriate. The character of the community references are there specifically to look at maintaining the New England charm of our city. We have a small rural city, and I think it's important to maintain that, and having people sort of look at that as an option in zoning, I think is really important. Otherwise, we end up with monstrosities like the one that's up there on Cottage Street, which just totally detracts from the whole downtown area. That's what I have so far.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Kathy. Appreciate you. Isabella?
Hey there, I just wanted to introduce myself.
State your name and address, sorry.
Oh, sure, sorry. I don't live in Easthampton. I'm the assistant planner for Hatfield. My name is Isabella Yeager, and I am just excited to see what you do here. We're about to rewrite our housing production plan and rework our zoning. And so I think you have the opportunity to really lead towns like ours and in a lot of ways. So I'm excited to see what you talk about tonight and bring it back to my planning board and my conservation commission. I'm also conservation agent. So thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you. Anyone else who has comment online or in here? No? Okay, so we will go ahead and get started.
So just one thing before we start, sorry.
Yeah.
Can I speak? Okay. I just wanted the process. I just wanted to speak to the process just a little bit so everybody understood. So if we do, so this is like in the advisory stage, basically, that we have recommendations. If we choose to act on any of these recommendations, not only will we send them back to the full council, but we'll also have to send them to the planning board, since it's a zoning change, and we would have to have a joint public hearing with the planning board as well, for any zoning changes. So, the process is just a little bit different than it is for, some other things. So I just wanted to make sure that people understood that piece.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to highlight too, when we send this back to city council, there'll be opportunity for people to participate in that conversation at city council. There will be opportunity for you to participate in conversation with the planning board in that joint meeting when that happens. And when it comes back to city council, if those are approved by the joint meeting, come back to city council, and you will again have the opportunity to speak in favor or not in favor, or please. So please share your thoughts on this. Again, I'll give this to over to the chair of the committee, but I just want to again express my gratitude for the extensive amount of work that your committee put into this. It's clear that you spent months putting this together. And I think that you did this within the context of the housing production plan, right? And that's your responsibility. And I think that there are elements in this which you are putting these proposals out there, but they're not necessarily, they may be in conflict or maybe with other ordinances or the aquifer protection plan, etc. And so this is not a rewriting of those other kind of ordinances and guidelines and or plans. And so, this is the beginning conversation for us to figure out what can be done. So, want to let you know that and I don't want to speak for you.
You can speak for me. I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, but for the ordinance committee, I think this was just a lot of work, a lot of thoughtful work. And I think that it's the beginning opportunity for us to have this conversation. So I want to turn it over to you all to kind of begin to walk us through this. And again, this is just the first night. And there'll be lots of opportunity for us to be able to have conversation about this and work through it.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Denham. My name is Jana Tatro. I'm the chair of the Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership. I'm joined tonight by Ben Brager, Lindsay Rothschild, and Kayam Jamrog McQuaid online. And I am happy to be the spokesperson tonight, but Kayam did the lion's share of the writing for this report, and so really deserves a lot of credit as the author.
May I ask one question before you go?
Yes.
How many members are on your committee?
We have 9.
Okay.
For the first time in a very long time. We are fully
the reason I'm asking is they have 4 members here, and so I want to make sure that they do not have quorum. So that's just a procedural question. So.
Yes, thank you for making sure. So the mission of the Housing Partnership is to support the production and preservation of long-term quality affordable housing in the city of Easthampton. We are a volunteer advisory board. We are appointed by the mayor, and we are staffed by the planning department. So this report is the culmination of over a year's worth of work by the partnership. We came to these recommendations after reviewing the goals and strategies outlined in our 2021 housing production plan, the 2008 master plan, and data about the rising costs of housing throughout Easthampton and the Pioneer Valley. And we really started by asking ourselves, is our zoning working for us? Is it really doing what we want it to do? And we started critically thinking about how our zoning bylaws might be contributing to our escalating housing prices. Even though our mission is really centered around affordable and fair housing, that's not the focus of these recommendations. This is really about all housing in Easthampton and what strategies we might use to temper our rising housing costs and to make our community welcoming and affordable for residents at all levels. Our recommendations are divided into two categories, cleaning up some outdated and undefined language, and then zoning recommendations. And this includes months of research and meetings, looking at what other communities in Massachusetts were doing, and getting feedback from city councilors and from city employees. We believe that our zoning recommendations could help seniors stay in their homes longer by allowing more flexibility on the use of their property, will allow us to get away from large, expensive homes on large lots, which is contributing to our rise in housing prices, and create more walkable neighborhoods with smaller carbon footprints. Just a couple weeks ago, the state released its Building for Tomorrow report by the Unlocking Housing Production Commission, which Mayor LaChapelle was on. And that report includes recommendations that closely align with our recommendations, including, as one of our public speak folks just mentioned, eliminating parking minimums, ensuring that our local zoning aligns with our long-term planning goals outlined in things like our housing production plan and master plans, and allowing two-family homes on all residential lots. So as Councilor Denham just said, this is just the beginning of the process. We have a long way to go. We're incredibly proud of this report. I think this is the largest piece of work that we've ever produced in the 15 years that I've been on the partnership. And we're just excited to get started. So thank you for having us.
Great. Thank you so much. And I just want to reiterate, you should be very proud of yourselves. Like, I mean that very genuinely. This is a lot of time, a lot of work. I sat in some of the meetings just listening, and it was a privilege to be a part of, I think, the thoughtfulness in which you approach many of these things, some of which are not going to happen potentially, right? But there was always a dialogue, I think, that was behind kind of the questions that you asked, right? And I think that this is what this is all about, right? Even this conversation right here with everybody, right? It's about dialogue, it's about conversation, it's about everything, because I think at the end of the road, we all are thinking about what's best for our residents, what's best for Easthampton, et cetera. So with that, I'd like to just allow, or give space to Councilor Derby, also President Derby, to provide any thoughts, reflections, and things like that on your first kind of read of this.
Yeah, so I mean, I think some really good stuff in here. I mean, you know that I've been an advocate for affordable housing for a very long time. Almost got beat up in my first year of being a city councilor for supporting.
So this is a therapy session.
Yeah, but it's fine. I think that I like a lot of the recommendations, and I would say the only place where I think maybe we can get a little creative is potentially looking at overlay districts. And maybe, we have a TDR ordinance, and for those that don't know, it's transfer of development rights. I think maybe incorporating some components of TDR within this could be interesting, to say, because, I think one of the things that makes Easthampton such an amazing place to live is the balance of open space and, housing. And I don't want to lose that. So, for me, if I was going to say, what are my biggest concerns, I would say, obviously the aquifer protection is important. And then secondly, I think, finding a way to maximize open space, even if there's development, to find ways to preserve some of that open space. And, one of the things that brings me back to a planner, our first planner for the city was Stuart Beckley. And I remember he had this big map that he blew up, and it was wildlife migration in the city of Easthampton. Somehow he got that. I don't know if we still have it somewhere in the office, but I think that piece is important to look at, because I know that we have some wildlife corridors in Easthampton, and I think that we should acknowledge that as we move into this process. And that's where I was like, well, if we could use a transfer of development rights from those wildlife corridors to other parts of the city to increase the density, I think that could be interesting to think about, because then we can accomplish some of the goals that we have of increasing density in certain areas, but also look at protecting pieces that are important for animals that are coming off the mountain, going through Nonotuck Park and heading into the like Manhattan River area, which I think is a critical corridor. Those are like, at this point, I figured I'd say my concerns first.
Yeah.
And those are them. I mean, really not a ton. And I think like the consolidation of the zoning districts makes sense. I think that if we can do things to allow people to use their property more efficiently, then we should do that. And if we can if we can reduce setbacks so someone could put an addition on their house so their, family could move in. I mean, we know, like, I don't mean other people, I know firsthand, kids aren't moving out at this point. And so that changes the dynamic of houses. And, so we're becoming these, larger family units, multi-generational. And I don't like with the price of housing, I don't know if that's changing. So I think that we can do things to encourage that. It's great. So my overall first read of this is I think optimistic. And I see a lot of really good things in here. So that's my first stab at it.
Oh, yeah. It's so funny when we think historically, right? We had dwellings where we had large families, right? And within those families, a lot of organizing was happening. And then they thought, oh, we can't have all that organizing. So we split them off into single families and things of that nature. And here we are again with the consolidation of wealth. We have people consolidating back into homes, et cetera, right? And so that's just kind of the nature of the time that we live in. But, as a city councilor, I've, we're working on a kind of a rent freeze opportunity within the city, which is not allowed within the state, but the discussions have really emerged from the number of people who are being forced out of their rental units because of, I think, predatory kind of pricing of rent. And so this is a huge problem. And so this is an opportunity for us to be proactive in terms of trying to help residents who live in Easthampton be able to stay in Easthampton. And so that's a goal. So let's just start to kind of dig in to this. You go over a lot of some of the introduction, the climate, the problem definition. So let's start to get into just a little bit about some of those pieces so that we can start to, upzoning and infill and parking minimums, just so we can begin to have that conversation, so we can kind of begin to think about those things. So the next meeting that we have, we can actually maybe come back with some ideas that actually allow us to like find some sort of definition, do some research, come back, say, hey, I actually really like this, and this is something that we could probably start to do or to think about.
Kayam, do you wanna? Is Kayam there? I know he's there.
He was here.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yep.
Is there a place where you want to start, Kayam, do you think? Do you want to start at the beginning, Councilor Dunham?
Yeah, I think start at the very beginning. I think the beginning is best. I think the where we get into the kind of the zoning consolidation, I think that's going to be a little bit more in-depth conversation.
Yeah.
But some of these other pieces that we can just start to wrap our heads around in terms of what you mean by some of the language.
I didn't bring my copy with me because I thought we were going to have way more public speak.
I think that's kind of the.
Oh, I might have it on my phone. Hold on.
Because you also give a lot of recommendations for language changes, because I think what's going to happen, to be perfectly honest, and this is going to be some of this stuff I think we can probably send to the planning board sooner. We don't have to send it all in one thing, but we can kind of do it kind of piecemeal. And then when we get into more of the other pieces, right, those will be a more lengthy conversation. So I think that's going to be easiest for us to kind of work through this.
So one of the easiest ones is just updating the language from the Department of Housing and Community Development to the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, which is basically what it is now. And I mean, I don't know if there's any value in even considering not actually naming, should it change again? I guess.
Changes again.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but that's one of the things that's just like, that's a little bit of an outdated language, that we are suggesting we take off. Okay, wait, I'm trying to find it.
You want my copy?
No, I got it.
Sorry, I should have brought more copies.
I was anticipating not speaking as much. And then the second, so that's the first one. The second one is about parking minimums. And this was something that was included in the housing production plan. And we have, if you look like the table 10.3 in the zoning ordinance, there's just lots of different parking regulations. And we had a tendency to also have multifamily housing have higher parking requirements than anything else, which seems unnecessary. And so the recommendation is to have all multifamily housing, not making a difference between affordable multifamily housing and non-affordable multifamily housing, have the same parking requirement, which is 1.5 spaces per unit. And it could be reduced to an average of 1 per unit based on the unit mix and the project location. So, if it was downtown, the developer could say, I only need, it just gives a little bit more flexibility, and aligns them to be the same so that we didn't have 2 different parking requirements based on affordability.
So I'm going to ask, Kyan, do you have, if I make you a host, can you share that, your screen?
Yeah, I can do that.
Let me, add as co-host.
Okay, there we go.
And let's just stay on parking minimums for just a second.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
And can you make your screen bigger? Is that at all possible? Oh, the other way.
There you go.
Yeah, okay. Just for folks who might be watching.
Connie, if you X out the box where all the people are, it'll look bigger for people that are in the room. I mean, I have it on my tablet, so I don't need it, but it should go bigger. In theory.
Well, I'm gonna make it bigger. There you go. There we go.
Yeah, so that table is 10.10-3, which is the off-street parking regulations from the zoning. And then we made the suggestion.
Can you just scroll yours up a little? There we go. Oh, the other, yep, there you go. Whoop, whoop. There we go. Questions about this?
I'm in agreement, but I'd be curious to hear the perspective of the planning. Just because I know that that's something that like we've questioned before, and there was rationale, I think, but I'm just curious like what our current thought is. Because it does seem to make some sense.
Yeah. So I tend to agree with the statement that was made earlier that developers will build what they think is needed. That's based on my conversations with them. It's like, they have ideas in their mind of like what sort of conditions they expect their tenants to expect, and kind of cater to that. I think I agree with not having different standards for affordable versus non-affordable housing for parking requirements. 1.5 spaces per unit seems reasonable. I do think there should be flexibility for the planning board to reduce it. And what exactly the process of that looks like, if it's a special permit or if it's just a waiver. I think that's important. It definitely does vary depending on where in town you're talking about. Of course, people that closer to town are less likely to have multiple vehicles. That's not that makes me public transit. So yeah, I mean, I agree with it. I don't see a concern necessarily.
Yeah, I'm of the same mind of just, you're trying to build a walkable city, you gotta build a walkable city and stop building the infrastructure constantly for cars. I think, yeah, what's put forward there. Anything reducing it, I would already say, right, that is certainly reasonable. It's a step in the right direction.
Great.
I have one thing too. I was just going to add too, I think, our mission is a lot of the time it's capital A affordable housing, like subsidized housing and that stuff, but this initiative is really focused on like just lowering the cost of housing in general. And I think this is one instance where that goal is being met, and it also meets the goal of like increasing walkability in the city. If the developer doesn't have to build a parking garage or dedicate half their lot to a large parking lot, then it's going to significantly lower the cost of development and also allow them to build a larger development because not as much parking is needed. So I think that's another kind of performance reduction as well.
Great. Any other questions about? So let's go to the next. Yeah. So Pam, can you scroll up to the next section? Or scroll down to that? Yeah, sorry. And so walk us through what you're thinking here.
So this is about fair housing language that was currently in zoning, in which many cases sort of just like went farther than our zoning needs to go. A lot of fair housing, these are fair housing laws in Massachusetts or federal laws. We don't need to be as prescriptive. Also, in some cases, it's changed. And so, for example, like 7.464 is talking about how affordable housing should be rented or sold. And it goes into this long explanation. It's like about the state and what's in a lottery, and all of those things are governed by other regulations. And so if an affordable housing development is being financed through the state, all of this is going to be required in other documents. It doesn't really need to be repeated again in our zoning, and it changes. And so it's better suited to basically say shall be rented or sold and occupied by eligible households as delineated by the state regulation, because that's where it would live anyway. And if the state regulation changes, we're not having to update our zoning or have our zoning be in opposition to the state regulation.
So just out of curiosity, would we want to list what those things are just so that people easily accessible, not repeating it, but just stating what they are? That's the question.
I personally don't think it's necessary. Again, this is our zoning, so it's not really about who's going to live in the units. And I mean, that could change based on what kind of project it is, how it's financed.
Was this looked at against the 40-hour statute in code of mass regulations?
I'm not sure. So that would be something we should.
Yeah, this section of the zoning ordinance was adopted pursuant to at the time DHCD very prescriptive requirements that they had, and they had to approve it. So that's the only reason I suspect some of this was dictated by them, but things have changed obviously over time.
Great. Okay. Question. Thank you.
Is that true for 4.466 and 8.344?
It's only true for the smart growth overlay.
Okay.
1.466.
Okay.
So just for anyone watching, I think these are the questions that we need to be asking so that we can go back and do this, right? So kind of going through each of these sections is really helpful.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, so the other changes in this table, again, are just, we felt didn't need to, well, so 8.344. We are suggesting we strike the language in part C because it's determined by the funding source, of course, unless we are required to keep it in. We are suggesting to strike number 1, which is priority consideration shall be given to households not currently owning a home. That is essentially saying if I am an elderly homeowner living in a home that is too big for me and I get chosen for an affordable housing lottery, I can't move there because I already own a home that is unsuitable for me. So it feels unnecessarily restrictive and discriminatory. There are other, and the state has rules and regulations that would govern how assets and income would be counted. So if someone owned a very, very expensive home that they sold for $1 million, there are methods to calculate if that person would be income eligible to purchase another home in an affordable housing situation. So we felt like it was unnecessary to have that there. Okay. Section 2 has to do with local preference. So this is a very common thing that comes up when we are permitting affordable housing development. Questions about, are we going to have priority for Easthampton residents? At the time that this was probably included, it was very, very common for cities and towns to get a 70% local preference. In recent years, the state has been particularly cracking down on just blanket approving 70% local preference. They want the developer and or the community to prove that they need such a preference because it really is can be kind of exclusive, right? So so we are suggesting we strike it because it really is determined by the funding source. If during the permitting process, zoning or planning says we want there to be a 70% local preference, which I think may have occurred in the Main Street property, perhaps with community builders. I'm looking at Dylan, maybe.
Couldn't tell you offhand of what that shook out to be.
The community builders then has a burden to go back to EOHLC and like prove that we need it. And EOHLC could approve it or not. So it feels unnecessary to have it in our zoning because it's something that's going to get approved or denied at the state level. Any other questions on that one? And then 8.345. Oh, this is assuming that the Easthampton Housing Authority was going to be monitoring the resales of affordable housing developments in the city, which may or may not be true. And so we are suggesting we strike that to just put housing agency. So affordable housing developments like Mountain View condos on East Street, for example, has a monitoring agent written into their regulatory agreement. So it's some agency, could be the city, that's responsible for if the units come up for resale, making sure that it's resold to an income eligible person. And so in this particular case, it's just written that it'll always be the housing authority, which would be up to the regulatory agreement, not up to the zoning. And then in 8.6, which is the planned unit residential development section, we are suggesting that we replace families with households throughout the document.
Can you share why?
Lindsay, did you work on the fair housing section? I think we just thought it was more inclusive.
It was more inclusive.
Yeah.
Because
Just trying to give us.
No.
Why are we talking about
It
this?
is kind of described in the paragraph.
Yep, that's why I was.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, yeah. And then we go on to talk about changing the definition of family.
Yep. Okay, great. So in this section, questions, I think there's some important questions. Are we required to keep this? So I think we need to figure that out. So maybe I can reach out or you all can reach out or collectively we can reach out in an email. Is there a way for us to figure out, like, is this required language? And
Yeah, I mean, I for the smart growth sections, I have this, 40 hours the statute, and then the Code of Mass Regulations is 760 CMR 59. It's pretty lengthy, so it'll, you know, it's not be a quick read to compare, but it can definitely be determined. Absolutely. And in the section 8, I'm less sure about that.
Okay.
So, you know, this can certainly be.
Okay, great. So I won't expect you in the next 30 seconds. Give us the rationale. Okay, great.
I was gonna say, I did find the answer. Yes, we did have the 70% preference on the 385 Main Street.
So I think what we'll do is I'll reach out, we'll figure that out. And then we can come back and edit that. And then at the next meeting, we can have another discussion about that. So we know the answers to those things. Okay, great. Let's just go on to the next section, which is community character.
Well, first I just want to, there's a definition of family that we're
sorry.
recommending that's changing. So the current zoning in Easthampton includes a pretty traditional definition of family, which is currently individuals related by blood, marriage, and or adoption, or a group of unrelated individuals not to exceed 4 who are occupying a dwelling unit. It's pretty specific. It fails to recognize sort of different household configurations and sort of any multi-generational, bunch of roommates living together, you know, housing is expensive, etc. So we did do a search of what other cities and towns, how they define this in their zoning. And we really liked the one that we recommended, which is all the people who occupy a single housing unit, regardless of their relationship to one another. And basically like everybody who lives there. That was Medford, I believe.
Medford.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Great.
Community character. Community character, term character appears 25 times in our zoning, but it's never defined. And it's used in a variety of different ways. The way that I think about this is the way someone feels about their community is a feeling, right? Like how I might feel about my community character or my neighborhood is a feeling. And feelings don't belong in zoning. And it's really unfair, I think, to ask volunteer planning board and zoning board members to make decisions on something that we don't define in our zoning and that is based on very individual feelings. So our recommendation, it also can have a unconscious way to also exclude people. So, you know, it can also be a way to limit zoning, prevent zoning, discourage low income or non-white folks from living in a community. So we took a look at the table of all the different places where it's included in the zoning. In many cases, it's actually unnecessary because there's lots of other words in the zoning that describe exactly what you do or do not want to see. So for example, just the first one, which is under home occupation, minor home occupation, can't be open to members of the public and does not create nuisances included but not limited to the emissions of atmospheric pollution, excessive light, glare, noise, or vibrations, or increase the amount of traffic, or the residential character of the neighborhood. So I feel, in our opinion, all these other things are actually the important parts. It doesn't include excessive light, glare, noise, vibrations, traffic, atmospheric pollution. And so we're recommending that we don't need the part about residential character because all the other words in that sentence describe what you're looking for. So we're recommending that we strike it.
So if I understand the rationale, we're not talking about light, we're not talking about glare, we're not talking about noise, we're not talking about glare, but you know what? I'm just thinking that doesn't fit the character. And that's just my personal
feeling. It's your feeling.
Right. Okay, so I just
And it would also be subject to whoever lives on that block in that moment in time.
Right.
And whoever's on the planning and zoning board in that moment of time. Do you want me to go through each one?
Sure.
Okay. The next one has to do with building size cap for retail uses. The recommendation is to remove district character and to say to encourage new and retail development that enhances the city's primary commercial zones. So basically just take out those words. Next section is about wireless communication. Again, just doesn't seem necessary to be there. So the idea is to replace it with minimize adverse impacts on adjacent properties, residential neighborhoods, and the overall environmental and visual quality of the neighborhoods of the city of Easthampton. So we're just taking out quality and visual character of the city of Easthampton. Next one also has to do with wireless communication. Fencing shall be provided to control access to telecommunications facilities and shall be designed to be as unobtrusive as possible. Just striking out the part about scenic character of the city. I mean, the other thing I'll point out, which I think we all know, is that many different parts of the city have many different scenic, they look very different from one another. So, this just allows it to, designed to be unobtrusive as possible, fit into what's going on in the city. Smart growth, I guess this is a section that we might want to make sure we're not in opposition to the regulation, because we're just suggesting that we take out the character of Easthampton's existing neighborhoods, but we can look at that because since it's in the smart growth overlay district section. In places where it is defined or has other value, we're recommending we leave it. So 7.49 plan approval procedure waivers, we're leaving that as is. 8.3 multifamily housing, building design should consider the scale of the buildings in the neighborhood, just striking out the prevailing character. Accessory dwelling units, protect stability, property values, and the architectural design of neighboring buildings to the extent feasible by ensuring that the accessory apartments are created only in accordance with this ordinance. So again, if it's also an opportunity to define it as architectural character, that makes it more clear of what we're looking for. 8.6. Maintain and replicate the traditional New England land use pattern in which small villages are adjacent to common open space, and just taking out the rural character part. 8.8, downtown business district. Again, just development in the downtown business district shall consider the preservation and reuse of existing buildings in order to maintain the historic. It says replace with nature, which now I'm questioning myself. It's historic nature. I was like, why did we use the word nature? Historic nature and mixed use of the district. So hard to read these things out loud. 9.1, if anyone else would like to do this, I'm happy to have someone else read them. Just striking out section D, which is compatibility with the character of the surrounding residential areas, because it's not defined. 9.2, the board may grant a special permit under this section only if it finds that the proposed project has shown the following: that it will not have a detrimental impact on the surrounding neighborhoods or adjoining zones, striking out integrity of the character. Transfer development rights, leaving as is, preserving the remaining rural, historic, and agricultural character, because again, that is actually defined what it's talking about. Home occupations. Again, this is sort of like the minor home occupation section where it sort of defines all the things we don't want it to do. So we took out neighborhood character didn't seem necessary. Same with 10.446. We're already talking about gas, fumes, smog, smoke, dust, electrical disturbances, excessive light, glare, and noise. Same with 10.456. Commercial development performance standards, appearance and architectural design standards. So the first sentence we're suggesting to strike where it says character. And then in the fourth sentence, replace it with the planning board may take into consideration whether exterior building facades and materials are consistent with other buildings in the city of Easthampton. Again, taking out the words Easthampton's character. And then the sixth sentence, replaced with the planning board may consider whether the roof line is peaked or is otherwise consistent with other building styles in the city of Easthampton. Again, just taking out the character.
Three more.
Adult cannabis. It was fascinating to see where characters showed up in like all these different sections. Adult cannabis use establishments, just striking the part of our character. So it says the zoning will create a place for the public to responsibly have access to legal cannabis while mitigating community impact. Adult cannabis use 10.10.1. That last sentence, replacing it with any artificial screening device erected to eliminate the view from the public shall also be subject to a vegetative screen, and the board shall consider the surrounding landscape and view shed to determine if it's similar to other vegetative screens in the neighborhood. Last one, 12.7.1 is, again, just striking the character part. So special permits are intended to provide detailed review of certain uses and structures which may have substantial impact upon traffic and environment, health and safety, property values, utility systems, among other things. Kind of taking up character.
Yep, great. So thank you for that. And that was, I know that was a lot, but there was a reason. One, there was concern mentioned, so I wanted to be able to go through and talk about these. But from a best practice, what is, just thinking in the world of planning, right? Context of character. Is this something that this language is being moved away from? Is it like, what is your kind of professional perspective on kind of?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen both in my time in Easthampton with the planning and zoning board, as well as my time in Amherst on their zoning board of appeals. Character often gets brought up, and it's something where a board of volunteers is never going to make a determination based on something as vague as character. No one wants to be put in that position to be like, I kind of based on the vibes here, I'm going to say no, even though it fits everything else. So I agree. I think it's kind of a useless word in that you're never going to see somebody deny it based on character. If somebody wanted to make the argument saying it's good to have it in there, just to have a developer kind of have that sense of it. If you do remove it, would we start seeing things that are so egregious that we're like, got it, that doesn't fit in the character. I sure wish we had that word. I don't see it. But yeah, I'm of the mind that I think it's just kind of vestigial at best.
Good, that's helpful.
Yeah, it's definitely prolific. Zoning ordinances have a tendency to like carry things on from past generations for decades. And I think this is one of those. I worked in two very different communities, and I will say that other communities will use it as like a fail-safe in case there is that kind of curveball that hits you. And it's, zoning can't account for every single variable. Land use is like, it's remarkable how every scenario that comes across the desk is different in some way or another. But that said, it can be used as like a gatekeeping technique to discriminatory practices that are flying under the radar. So I think if there is an effort to define it in a more objective way, then I have no problem.
Great. So, Counselor Derby, Resident Derby, you've been on ordinance for quite some time.
For these because I'm
not saying that you are
responsible for some of them.
You haven't been here since 17 whatever, but let's have your thoughts.
So I mean, I think like I actually appreciate this because I was involved in passing a couple of those, and it was it was like the thought like, well, we want to make sure that the development that happens is in line with kind of like what's around. And as I reflect on that, one of the examples, I guess, is there's a little small town in Connecticut, and there's a little private school there, and I can't, the name of it's escaping me now. I used to have it in the back of my head, and everything's like red, like stone. And so when they built a Dunkin' Donuts, they had to match, and so it wasn't built out of red stone, but it was the same color. It was the same kind of like shape and size. And some communities will do that. They'll say, hey, we want things to, like, for example, if we said here, we want things to be red brick. I mean, so we should just say, we want things to be red brick instead of just, so I mean, that makes so much more sense. If we want to be specific in our zoning, we should be specific to take the interpretation a little less off the shoulders of volunteer board. And so I'm fine. I can't believe it wasn't in traditional neighborhood development. I can't believe there was no mentions to that. So I guess we did that one right. But yeah, so I'm fine with it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I think within the example you gave, you addressed architectural design.
Yeah, I think generally that's like what it's intended to.
Right.
Has obviously taken on other meanings.
Yep.
And I've seen it really, I mean, you spend meetings upon meetings of public speak just about community character. And it just really, not that that won't take it off the table, but if it takes us out of the zoning, sorry, am I speaking out of turn?
No, keep going.
I just really, this is my part of the report. I'm particularly passionate about it, but I've lived here a long time. I've seen many hearings on, particularly around affordable housing, and it comes up every time, and it comes up a lot, and it takes a long time. And I just think if it's not in the zoning, doesn't mean it's not going to come up, but the planning board and the zoning board are not trying to grapple with, oh, is this something I need to be really
survive before going forward.
Right. And like, I need to make sure it does fit this part of the zoning, because is it in the character? I think it's unfair.
Right. Yep. No. And again, I think to your point and to your point, right, I think in the past it has been used as gatekeeping technique, mechanism to be able to stop certain things from happening that maybe didn't necessarily have to be stopped based on other factors and characteristics. Kayam, you have your hand up.
Yeah, no, I guess I wanted to note this as something that sort of ended up on the cutting room floor as we were finalizing the report, because I think that, like what Councillor Debris was saying about establishing sort of guidelines or like ways to set standards for what we want our community to look like, what we want the downtown to look like. I think that a lot of communities do that. And I think that there's a process that's a lot more transparent and participatory. And that's like sort of the form-based code discussion where like you're establishing specific, like, here's like, if you're going to build a garage, it has to look like this on this side of the property, or it can't face the road, or, and then it also on the other side, it allows pre-approved, like if it follows those, you get to build it by right. And so there's a way to do it. I think that's, really transparent, gives everyone the same sort of chance of getting their thing built, and establishing sort of design standards as a community that isn't just like using vague terms. But that's like a really big can of worms. That's, we decided to leave it out of this report because it was a little bit too, like, we would have to hire consultants, and it takes like it's a whole other investigation process. But I think that's important to know as part of this conversation, that like, that's something that, I thought about and I wanted to initially recommend, but it is just a little bit too big of a can of worms.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. We are at 7 o'clock, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I think we've got a start here of a chunk of things that we can actually go back in the next bit of time to review, get clarification, and then come back and try to work through and make some decisions about those pieces, just so we can feel like we got something started. I think that's something really important. I think, like I said, I think some of these other pieces, as we get into them, there's going to be some more conversation and things like that we're going to have to really kind of chip away at. But this, I think, for just the sake of like getting us going and getting started and feeling like we're accomplishing something, I think this is a good place to start, and we'll try to find some answers to those things, and then we'll work forward. I do think we need to think about another time, since we're all here, that we can find another time. I can send out a doodle if we want to do that, but that was a doozy doodle that I sent out. So it may, since there's 7 of us, that might be the best kind of thing to do, but I'm open to, if we want to sit here and kind of plug away at finding the date.
We look into maybe early April. Is that
I think probably, given the fact that we have the other
right? The other
items,
things,
and it gives us a little bit more time to kind of find those answers and anything else related to this that we might want to kind of think about.
Just full disclosure, I believe it is the. God, I should really figure this out. I think it's the 3rd week of April is gonna be. So
okay, so that's some time. How about April 1st, just for fun?
Oh, look at that.
April 1st.
I can do that too.
Oh, well.
That is planning board meeting night.
Always the planning.
Oh, it's Tuesdays are gonna be planning.
Oh, right. The 8th.
Yep, it's open for me.
Uh-oh, I heard a.
No, it's fine.
Later on, no, we've got one.
My son has a track meet, but track meets are tragically boring, and so
This could be more exciting.
it'll be over by then, probably anyway.
Okay.
That should work for me.
The 8th.
Kai, does that work for you? We need you at these next, when we get to the more complicated sections.
Yeah, no, the 8th works for me.
Work for you all? Oh, look at, oh my God. Let's hope it works for camera.
Let's hope so.
So we're gonna say 6. 5:30? I'm just thinking
6 is
about
fine.
time. 6?
That's fine.
6. Okay.
I have Tamara added in this calendar thing. It's automatically going to notify her.
Oh, okay, perfect.
I don't know how that happened.
I don't know, but let's hope she accepts. Otherwise, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
I will reserve a room. Hopefully we can get this room again. Any questions or anything like that we started? For anyone listening, right? So we've started this conversation, we want to be able to include you in that conversation as well. So if there's questions, things like that for the next one, come with those questions so that maybe there's a way for us to be able to answer those or explore that. Okay.
And I'll also just say for the record, like, I'm open and happy to answer questions that people have. I think, like, I've been mentioned sort of tangentially as part of like a lot of these conversations, like in the Aquifer Protection District meeting and everything, but no one's really reached out to ask any questions about like what the process looks like. So I'm just, establishing that I can be a point of contact for that too.
Perfect.
Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks. And again, start, right? We're just going to start plugging through these. Some of these pieces are going to take a lot longer.
Yeah.
So this is just kind of a way for us to get it going. All right. Thank you both for being here. Appreciate your insights and thoughts, appreciate your questions. And we'll continue to kind of work forward with this. So with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thanks so much. Thanks, Kayam, and we'll see you all later.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.